It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just email me directly at Opperman Investigations because we're redoing the website. It hasn't been redone yet, so the best way is oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Email me. I'm really excited about today's guest. We have Anneke Lewis. You can find her at AnnekeLewis.com. She's written a book called, it's a personal life story, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. Another horrific topic we've covered here way too many times, but maybe one day we'll never do another show on this topic. That we'll reach a point in society where we no longer have to talk about this kind of stuff. You can find her at AnnekeLewis.com. That's ANNEKE, Lucas, LUCAS.com. You can find her on Instagram at Anneke.Lucas. Also, too, she's on Facebook at Anneke Lewis. And get this, man, you can meet her in person. She has a trauma yoga retreat in upstate Minnewaska State Park coming up in July 18th and to the 22nd. So keep an eye on that at the AnnekeLewis.com. Miss Anneke Lewis, are you there?
Yes, hello. Hi, Ed.
Long intro, right? But I finally got to you. Before we get into your story here, Quest for Love, a memoir of a child sex slave, tell us about yourself. Who is Anneke Lewis?
Well, I think I'm a very normal person. I have a rather quiet life, which I like. Quite peaceful. I meditate a lot. I don't party or anything like that. And I generally work with survivors of SRA, so as a counselor. So I've been doing that. That is completely based on my personal experience. I started doing that in 2013. And I just closed a nonprofit organization, which I founded in 2014 when I was going into the prisons to bring trauma-informed yoga there. And so that journey has come to an end now. COVID kind of shut everything down in that sense. And then I actually had been meaning to move out of that work and move more to work just solely with survivors. So I'm very happy to be doing that right now. And and I like to write. I do.
Now, I've done quite a bit of yoga, Bikram yoga, and just regular yoga. Now, how is it that what is your system of using yoga to treat trauma?
Well, over the time that I've been working, as a yoga teacher, so which started maybe in 2007, I started doing yoga in 1993, and then it was very difficult for me as a survivor to apply something that I knew was really great for my body and mind, but was being taught in a way that was extremely offensive or difficult, many obstacles to get through. So I basically created what is in general called the unconditional model. It's basically a system for any provider to work with someone, being fully present with that person, without coming from a place of needing the authority, if that makes sense, not needing to be the expert, not needing to be the authority, but being fully present with your heart fully open, and using power dynamics in a specific way in order to see where you are at, and then also to be able to be present with that other person. Because I found in my healing that the only thing that ever mattered was that someone was able to be with me without judgment, even if I tested them, that they remain non-judgmental. And if I saw them as an authority figure, their non-judgment was very powerfully healing for me, because I'd suddenly opened my own heart. And that's how I could feel love, and that's how I was able to begin to change even at a younger age. These kinds of things happened. It wasn't conscious then. And with therapy, it became conscious. And the unconditional model is that it's in the yoga. It would mean to teach yoga, but never using, for example, any commands at all. And as the teacher, being present, but you're not really making anybody do anything. So it's all about being present with the self, and the language is all geared towards being in the body, being present with yourself, and doing what feels right for you.
That sounds really beautiful, and it sounds really beautiful with the birds chirping in the background. But July 18th to the 22nd up in Minnewaska State Park, upstate New York, and the weather's beautiful up there at the end of July in upstate New York. It's just we used to go every year. Now, when you did this work in the prison system, were you treating survivors or actual offenders?
Well, of course, we were in the jails and prisons of New York, so we had all populations. We worked maybe mostly with women, but also with men and with youth. That's to say, youth, because in New York State, children of 16 years old were considered adults in the prison system, so in the justice system. So we worked with 16-year-olds because they were treated as adults in that system. But we ended up working with all populations, but mostly with women. And then I did work specifically with survivors of sex trafficking in the jails as well. But no, it was everybody. Everyone who's incarcerated already has the trauma of the incarceration. And for me personally, what I related to very strongly was the being treated like the lowest of the low all day long, being yelled at, being commanded all day long. I know what that feels like because that's part of my history, and so I would really relate. And then I met a lot of people whose trauma was in terms of intensity similar to mine, but mine is completely invisible mostly to the outside world. But there I found people who had similar degrees of trauma, if you will.
Gotcha. So it's in your book, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. This is the story of you growing up in Belgium. Can you tell us, bring us through the story of your life there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long do we have?
I got about 50 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep it short, basically, because it is all in my book. But I was born in Belgium. My mother was not well. I was not born in a cult or a satanic network. I wasn't. But my mother was a single mother, and she was mentally unstable. And she, I think that once she got married, we moved. We were new to the area. That she was targeted, or I was targeted, and by the network. And I believe that was because my mother was clear that my mother was, to them, that my mother was not well, not stable. And so I had people coming into my house, the cleaning lady, in fact, she was there for a year. She took me with her on weekends. There were other children during those weekends that were, they were Dutch, this couple, the cleaning lady and her husband were Dutch, and the children were mostly Dutch. So even though I'm in Belgium and this is Holland is very close, the Flanders, still, it was a little strange because they were all nieces. They said they were nieces and nephews, but they seemed to have a lot of nieces and nephews. And after about a year of that, from 5 to 6, on my 6th birthday, he raped me, and the couple then took me to the network. So that was the first time I was taken into the network, which is to say an organized group of mostly led by one politician who was at the time the Minister of National Defense, and he was the unequivocal boss of the Belgian arm of that network. But they did connect to the global network, if you will, through the children.
Now, this fellow, you say he was the head of the Belgian National Defense. How were you able to define him as the head of the Belgian National Defense?
Well, his name was Paul van den Boeynants, and he was at the time Minister of National Defense. He was 2-time Prime Minister of Belgium. So when you say Minister of National, he was a politician, and he was a prominent right-wing politician. He's also associated to the extreme right wing through an organization called CEPIC, and ultimately that organization was disbanded because of conflict of interest with a fascist group.
Now, how old were you when you first came into contact with these people?
So I was, as I said, it was just around my 6th birthday,
right.
And then I was in that network a total of almost 6 years, 5.5 years. I was traded to a global networker who was very revered in the network, and then I was mind control trained by not direct, well, somewhat directly by this man, and then also in a special facility in Germany, and then several follow-up sessions, let's say, and then I was kicked out of that inner circle, if you will, from the top globalist networkers. I was kicked out for being, for not going along, if you will, for standing up for myself, which I did a few times in the network. Not very often, because it's not like you have a lot of choice, but I did stand up a few times when I guess it was moments. It was not life and death, because the truth is I didn't care about my life very much, but I cared about my soul, and I had a sense of what that was. I had a sense of my inner light, and there were certain things when they happened that I just couldn't. I knew that I would never, my soul wouldn't survive. I would become like them. So there were certain times I had to stand up, and then I figured I would be killed for sure, but then somehow that did not happen. I got punished a lot, but I didn't get killed enough. Eventually, at the age of 11, I ended up being rescued out of that network by a young perpetrator who was just starting on this path, and he got me out. He made a deal for my life, and that is really what the book is about, is that relationship with that young perpetrator.
Yeah, and once again, the book is called Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. We may have to have you come back and really flesh out this whole entire story. And I'd love to have you come back just to talk about the whole yoga treatment. But now, you say you first came into contact with this group when you were 6 years old. Now, were you removed from your home and lived somewhere else, or they would take you from the home and bring you back?
The latter. I was taken from my house for my mother ended up my mother ended up taking over from the cleaning lady and her husband and became my own pimp. So she would drive me to events. She would drive me sometimes for weekends or just for the night, sometimes in the daytime on a school day. She would take me wherever she was told to take me.
Now,
then I would go back and go to school, and and then if I was not in school, there were doctor's notes and so forth.
Okay, and your mother was being compensated for this?
Yes.
Now, did she ever become like you mentioned several times that this was an SRA, satanic type of ritual abuse. Did she ever become enamored or involved in that type of faith or Satanism?
So no, my mother was not a Satanist. I think that she wanted to be. Certainly she wanted very, very much to belong to this club of what were the Belgian elites. She very much wanted to belong, but they never let her in. So I'm not sure. Maybe it was because she was too eager, because her kind of mental health issues, because I think they are really insane. But you can be completely insane and raping children and killing people, and yet at the same time have a really good sense of how the world works and how power works and what you need to do to get away with everything. But my mother's insanity was maybe a little too obvious, that she wouldn't be able to keep quiet because she was so eager to show off any kind of connection with higher up people that she would have given them away, perhaps. I'm not sure. That's just my guess.
Like a loose cannon, an expression that they use, right? Someone not reliable, right? Now, what is your relationship?
Right.
Yeah, what is your relationship with your mother today?
Well, my mother died, and before her death, I have to say I had no contact with her because it was very. She'd never changed, so it was not like there was ever any. I think what I've worked on to describe in the book is how projection works. You know, when adults project onto children what they need to see, the children feel it, and so I was projected on so much, and I hope that that is very clear how adults' projections create gestalt in children, and then these let's say parts they live on. And there's the little girl who wants to please her mother, and what does she have to do? And being with my mother was more difficult than being in the network for me, because there was nothing there of myself. She didn't see me at all. It was complete. It was 100% projection, and she didn't see anything interesting or real.
Now,
so it was very difficult, very difficult to be around her. So I didn't have a relationship with her in my adult life. Mostly, I tried to talk with her, and that didn't really result in anything. I couldn't really be ever myself with her. I couldn't speak up. It never resolved. But I did call her about a year before her death to forgive her, and there was this little moment, this little window where she was open, and I was able to tell her that I forgave her for everything, and she was surprised, and maybe that was the only time in her life in my life that I saw her or heard her when I was on the phone, being surprised.
Did she ever acknowledge to you that she exposed you to this type of abuse?
No, although because she wasn't that stable, she would say things like, well, I thought I was driving you to your friend's parents for sleepovers. She said things like that. Not really an acknowledgement of what she did. She said, for example, oh no, people who do that, they are part of this, or people who take their children, they're part of this too. No, that's not me. So.
Now, when you were first exposed to this, was this just, or not just, but was this just like a sexual assault, or was there actual a religious ritual involved, or blood sacrifice with candles? Can you describe to us what you were exposed to?
Yes. So mostly it was sex, and sex particularly in the small club of Belgian elite, where people were slowly indoctrinated until they were deemed ready for the children. And that would basically probably mean going from a teenager and then younger and younger. And then they would be blackmailed. So it was a system of blackmail that once you're in, you can never get out kind of thing. Once you're in, once you've seen too much, you can't get out. So they have you. So mostly it was sex. But the Belgians also had rituals. They killed children ritualistically. Now, in my experience, I should say, because I don't know Belgium today, I don't know what it was like in the 80s, I don't know what it was like in the 90s, but in my experience, Paul van den Boeynants and the people that were the regulars at that time, they were not themselves religious. Now, the top networkers, the globalist networkers, the very important people, the ones that the Belgians looked up to and tried to emulate, they were very sincerely religious. They were sincere Satanists, if you will. They had sold their soul to Satan, and the Belgians would do rituals, have rituals to accommodate them and to emulate them. But they didn't themselves believe. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Because I believe that there are some people in high places of power that would have no clue about occult or Satanism or Crowley or any of these little details, but that are part of the game. You know what I mean? That they're going along with things, but they wouldn't have that kind of occult knowledge or that kind of spiritual knowledge. Now the thing is,
and the Belgians particularly, they didn't believe in it. That was my sense, that they kind of thought it was stupid.
Right.
Even. They didn't believe it. But they did all the same things. They were complete psychopaths, and they did all the same things. So children were murdered ritualistically.
Now, how did you come to recognize and identify these Belgian elites? Certainly at 6 years old, you didn't know who was the head of the defense. You didn't know who the prime minister was.
No, I didn't.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah, no. I had no idea. Of course, I had heard that this is some kind of somebody high up in the somebody high up in politics or this or that. I would overhear, but no, I had no idea. And in fact, some of these people would probably be on TV regularly, but because I didn't know them that way, I wouldn't have recognized them either.
Right.
So I didn't recognize Paul van den Boeynants until the Dutroux case had named him. So Dutroux case, in 1996, there was a huge scandal in Belgium that had to do with the network, and that one pimp was caught after he had been kidnapping girls. And so 2 girls were rescued from dungeons that he had built in his house, and 4 girls were, 4 bodies of little girls were found on the grounds of his houses. So when that happened, it was an international scandal, the Belgian pedophile scandal it was called, because he immediately said, Marc Dutroux immediately said, oh, well, I was just a small cog in this giant wheel, and, I'm protected from higher up. So at the time, I didn't know anything, but immediately or soon after, I'm not sure when, Van den Boeynants was named, and I recognized him right away. It's the same with Michel Nihoul, who was the middleman. He was not a big politician, but he was the middleman at the, he started, he wasn't in the network when I first arrived, but by the time I was 10, he was active, and he was working very hard to be the big connector, gopher for the VIPs, but he was working real hard and very active in the network, and he was one of the defendants in that case. He got off, but yeah.
Okay, so and so you came to recognize them after you had already escaped these people.
Yeah, I was rescued at age 11, and then I left the country at an early age. I actually was rescued, and the young gangster, he was 21 at the time, or 22, who rescued me, gave me a list of instructions for my life, and I followed them religiously. So those instructions involved to never become, the first one was never become a prostitute, never sleep with anyone for anything. Now, that was a very important direction, because at age 16, I ended up in the Red District, except I wasn't going to sleep with anyone because of that direction. So all the directions were lifesavers. Don't become a prostitute. Don't become an alcoholic or a drug addict. He told me whom I should marry, or the profile, a very precise profile of the man I should marry. He told me I should leave the country. I should go here. I should go to London, Paris, New York, settle in New York. He was just thinking out loud. I ended up living in all those different places. I followed those instructions very carefully. And that's really why I was able to be okay.
Okay, a couple of questions real quick. Now, you called him, just to clarify, did you call him the young Danester or the young gangster?
He was a gangster.
Gangster.
That's what he did
Okay.
in his life. Yeah.
Now these instructions that he gave you, do you believe that these were prophetic instructions, or do you believe that these were just from being a professional out there in the street knowing what to do?
Yeah, it was definitely a mix. It was definitely very intuitive, and it was also that he was very controlling in that sense, so he kind of was a professional too, but it felt prophetic.
Okay, very interesting. Have you ever had any contact with him since all this?
No. That was the last. When he dropped me off at home after giving me these instructions, I never saw him again then, and then he was killed not that long after. 15 years later he was killed, but it was in service of the deal that he made to get me out, because he went to work for the politician in charge, Van den Boeynants, surreptitiously, of course, as his left-hand man, right? Mm-hmm. And 15 years later, that politician got in trouble. He was caught on tax evasion, 137 counts or something like that. Anyway, he was caught. He was going to have to go to prison. His name was in disrepute. He gets kidnapped. He's gone for 1 month. He comes back after the ransom is paid. And he has the most attended press conference in the country's ever known. He's a star. He's a hero. And for some reason, it worked. They dropped everything. They dropped all the charges. And his name, he got his good name back. And
then he died later? He died?
No, he did really well. The politician died in his, old age. But the gangster who had to work for him and who had fake kidnapped the politician, he ended up getting caught, and then he committed suicide in prison, which seems like could have definitely not been a suicide.
Yeah, it seems like an epidemic these days, right? Let me ask a question now. Now, you discovered this by watching all this on TV and said, hey, I know that guy. This is the guy that rescued me?
No, I didn't know any of this. The truth is that I didn't know anything because I wasn't interested in Belgian news. All of this happened before I even started to remember. The first I got was, the Dutroux case, and then in 1998 when another survivor like me came forward, or her story was being published because it was clear that her testimony wasn't going to be used in this case. Once she came forward, I recognized, and then it was actually in a conversation with her that she named him. I described him, and she named him to me. He was already active, and he was, he continued going to the network orgies and whatever in the 80s when she was being abused there.
Gotcha. Now, okay, You mentioned several times that you had this group in Belgium, which like a kind of lower level, but then there were globalists. Can you tell us this? Were there any names of these globalists we would recognize their names?
You would definitely recognize their names.
Have you named them in the book?
No.
Quest for Love, Memoirs of Child Sex. If you have not mentioned them in the book, but these are names we would recognize. These are names that are of people still in power today.
No, everyone that I came across is dead, but the families are still powerful, and the family, and I've been threatened and so forth. So I am careful.
Okay, so let me ask you about the threats. Now, have you been threatened prior to the book coming out? Because the book's only been out a short time, June 21. It's only been out, the ink's not even dry yet, okay? How many interviews have you done before this? Have you done any interviews?
I've done many interviews. I've been out since 2013. There's lots of videos. You have asked me before to be on your show, and I said no. I have been, my story's been out there since 2013. And in 2020 or 2019, I was approached by a lawyer to sue the estate of the major perpetrator under the CVS law, the Child Victims Act. Yeah. CVA, Child Victims Act. And so when we were looking into that, of course, the lawyers contacted that family, and so during that time, it began, the threats and the infiltration and so forth.
Okay, so and where did that lawsuit go? Nowhere?
No, ultimately, the lawyer in New York that we had found, that was not really the right person. And then when he left, then I was never excited about this. I have to tell you the truth. I just felt that it's in God's hands. If I have to do this, I will. But I didn't look forward to the sensation around it. And obviously, everything has to come from my, these are people who are, all of their resources are into keeping the secret and into making sure there is no physical evidence. And the courts are kind of their turf, if you will. So it would have been, there were other survivors of this person, so we did have that power. But there was no physical evidence, of course, just my testimony and their testimony, and ultimately we didn't find a lawyer, the right lawyer to do it, and I was fine with that.
No, I totally understand how that goes. Usually the survivors of these situations, they don't want to pursue, even when they got a great case. It's just amazing. You wouldn't believe some of the cases that slip away. Now, you said you're in touch with other survivors that were victimized by this same network.
All the time.
Okay. And has there been any additional attention come to you since the book was published? Any additional threats?
No, not yet. We'll see what happens. There's other things, like little things have happened. Like, for example, my wiki page was removed, and, then at some point it was impossible to Google me, and then people were saying they couldn't Google my book and so forth. And I don't know how this is all going to go. We'll see.
Right. Okay. Now, when you were 6 years old, from 6 to 11, this period of time, at that time, were you aware of other children that were also being put in the same harm and trauma as you were?
That's for sure. I wasn't the only child there.
Okay. So how many other children did you see there and meet?
That's hard to answer. Definitely many. And there were different kinds of children. There were the children whose parents were in the network, so they were also being abused, mind you. Especially in Belgium, this was the children of the aristocrats were also being abused, but whereas the business people tended to not bring their children, and other children were, I'm not sure the term dispensable. I had no value. My life had no value until, at age 9, the global networker took an interest in me. And then when I got that special training, then I had value in the network. But I was still going to be killed. I mean, I was, it's not as if you're safe because, I'm not sure why they took an interest. Also, it wasn't anything in my hands for sure.
Now, you mentioned special training. What was that special training?
So the training I received in Germany is very much like MK Ultra training. It was very directed, precise. There was no testing going on. They knew exactly what they were doing. It was one doctor who was in charge, and they were younger handlers. They were maybe 20 early 20s, young men who were handlers who were, putting in the programs. And it was torture-based mind control, and I had to observe how effective it was. I felt myself change rapidly. Very effective.
What do you think they were training you for? For what purpose?
Well, I write about that in the book. I was being trained for a special purpose. That was to say I was going to be owned by this global networker, and he did have something very specific in mind, and that was based on my special gifts already. So, that, at first you were evaluated. I think the very first thing that happened was a blood test was done, and so I never really gave much thought to this before. but I knew they were happy with my blood test, and it was sort of the first thing they did. So maybe through my father's side, I'm from a bloodline. I'm not sure if that was something, so they could do this. I could get this kind of role. I'm not sure, but certainly the torture was in order to access the subconscious mind and then bypass the rational mind in order to act. So they have many techniques, and they're very good, and they know the science, they know the psychology through and through. And that was 1972.
Yeah, it does seem that they're aware of this trauma-based mind control has gone on for centuries, and it does seem that it's been being passed down, that they know what they're doing. Now, I'm curious again about these other children at the same age. Were they all the same age as you, or different ages, all in different groups?
Different ages, and again, there were children in the Belgian network. There were those children whose lives were worth nothing. And again, I write about this in the book. And then there were other children who were the children of the aristocrats, though I didn't see that many of those children. And then in the mind control facility in Germany, most children were much younger than I. They were maybe 2 and 3. They were little, really little.
Okay, once again, the book is Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. You can find it on Amazon, and also through the Opperman Report bookstore. We're reloading up the books into the bookstore again at oppermanreport.com. Okay, now, you mentioned that some of these kids were the children of the Belgian elites. Some you describe as disposable, I believe the word you used was. Now, would these be kids that would be like earthquake victims from Haiti, like foreign kids that would seem to be just like trafficked from foreign nations, third world countries?
I think all the kids were locally sourced, but again, this is 1969 to 1974, so I think things have changed a lot since then, obviously. But the disposable kids at the time definitely were, for example, the children of immigrants. And at the time, most of the immigrants were Turkish and Moroccan, and so you would see the brown-skinned children, and they were used for killings, or in events where children would be killed or could be killed, and obviously the children of the aristocrats were being raped.
Now, do you ever recognize any of those children, the aristocrat children, as adults now in society, on TV, in positions of notoriety?
No, in fact, I've never seen any of the children. I wish, but I have connected with so many survivors out there that, for example, I have spoken with 2 other survivors who were in that same training facility as I was at the same time in Heidelberg in Germany. So even though I don't remember seeing them maybe specifically, we were there. One was there at the same time. The other one was there later. But yes, I have spoken to people, so there's these things that we have in common. But the children that I remember from childhood, I wish I would see them again. I wish I knew what happened to them, but I don't.
Yeah, it just seems to, because I know what you're talking about. It does seem like these elites, especially business and powerful businessmen, do sacrifice their own children into these groups, networks, and allow their children to be abused in order to move ahead in these groups. Yeah, right. Now, you mentioned Heidelberg. Do you know the exact address and location of where this facility was in Heidelberg, Germany?
No, I don't know the exact location, although someone has sent me pictures of a place that it could be. I don't particularly recognize it. I just remember the town, and I remember, of course, some of the spaces. So, yeah.
So you're saying you remember the spaces inside the facility, or you remember like from the train station to the building and that kind of stuff?
Oh, no, well, it wouldn't have been in the train station. I was driven there always. But I do sort of have memories of the grounds as well. And The pictures that were sent me, I would say possibly, but I don't want to say 100% with 100% certainty. I don't know.
Sure. Oh boy. Now you say you were rescued by this young gangster. Now, how did that come about? He took pity on you?
I wouldn't say that. He had been interested since a year prior, and so the story of the book is really that relationship. So when I met him, there was a connection made. It was the first time he was brought into the network, and he was 20 years old himself. And he met me, and I actually defied him, and that was, maybe my mind-controlled way of pleasing him, but he was very impacted by that. And he liked me very much, and he was very attached, really. So he protected me for half a year, and then the second half of the year, once the sex began, he became extremely abusive, which then would have definitely ended in my death. But the moment I was going to be taken to be tortured to death, I reconnected with him with defiance, and somehow that got through. He went to basically negotiate a deal with Paul van den Boeynants for my life as I was being tortured by Michel Mihoud and children that were being indoctrinated. So the children were made to torture me. Mm-hmm. Michel Mihoud was the head of this, was in charge of this, and that was stopped. It was stopped because they struck a deal.
Now, what did he have to give up? What was the quid pro quo? What was his part of the negotiation in order to rescue you from there? Do you know?
Well, before he made this deal, he had all the power because he had a gun and he wasn't afraid to use it. After that, he belonged to the politician.
Gotcha. Okay, and then again, and you saw him later on involved in his kidnapping of this other fellow. And
no, I didn't see him at all. I never saw him again. He was dead by the time I found out his name. I didn't know his last name. I didn't even remember. I mean, these memories didn't just, it wasn't like I always knew all of this. It just started to come back in the 80s. But I had nothing to do with Belgium. I had nothing. I left Belgium when I was 19 and I never returned. So it's not like I was following the news in Belgium. I didn't know anything. It was before the internet too.
Right.
I wasn't trying. Yeah.
Then what was it that triggered your memories?
Well, again, as I said before, in the 90s when Dutroux was caught and there was suddenly talk of this Belgian network, it was just I'd already had the memories, but I didn't have any place for them. Plus, I couldn't find a therapist who was even willing to work with me because they couldn't handle this or they didn't believe me. So I was getting these flashbacks, and of course there's also so much shame around it as well. So, it would be much better if it wasn't true, but it just kept coming. So when I heard about the Dutroux case, and now suddenly there's a context. Because before I couldn't even fathom, how would it have even happened? I had no clue that could be even possible. And then the Dutroux case, I was like, well, gosh, maybe it is possible. And then I found the right therapist. And at the same time, then in Belgium, the other survivor, particularly one other survivor, Regina Louf, started to speak out. And then, I connected with, I spoke with her just like once or twice. But it was very helpful because we had, as survivors of the same network, she was able to help me fill in some gaps, including tell me the last name of the gangster, whom I had no idea what his name was. I just described his physique. And she said, oh, that sounds like, it's very interesting what she said. She said, that sounds like Patrick Hamers. And she said, and he was not a pedophile. Oh, he convinced himself that he wasn't. Okay.
Now, how were you able to find healing and treatment in your own life to bring you to the point where you became a therapist and now clearly you're on this path of healing and helping others?
Yeah, well, I shouldn't say that I'm a therapist because as I said, I just work from my own experience, but I do counsel people. Now, I started therapy in the 80s, so I already dealt with other sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse and incest that I'd suffered, other abuses. And then in the 90s, when I found this therapist who didn't know SRA but was open, worked with her very intensely. So that was that was really, really hard. And then I have a family, so when I was both very afraid to have a family, but also there was a desire, and I think that this mother love is what made me go much deeper and farther than I normally would have, because I somehow had a blueprint of what it's like to be a mother and what it should look like, and I was failing. So I needed to better myself. And in order to better myself, I had to go deeper into my story, and so that's what I did. I would have, and I was aware that if it weren't for someone needing me, a little person who needs me, I would have killed myself many times. And that's part of the programming as well, that you start remembering things, you're supposed to kill yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right, and also too, when you do become a parent, there are big life events, but parenting is a big one. It does trigger memories of your own childhood. Did that happen with you as well?
Yes, depending on the age. Yes,
right.
At certain ages, I would be that would trigger certain memories. But I should say I'd had a lot of memories already. But yes, no, definitely, and I should say. I'm still getting memories. It's not like it's all over, right? I'm not like, oh, I'm completely healed now. But I did reach a point where I was able to cure, let's say, the profound guilt complex that I had. And that was creating this imbalance in me that I really had trouble functioning. Once that was healed, once I really felt it settle inside of me, and I felt, okay, now I have like what you could call the beginning of self-esteem, like an anchor. I'm grounded now. I won't lose myself. And then I started to, obviously, the service work started then, and that was the year I knew. You see, with the Dutour case, there was pressure to reveal my story back then, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to go to the police. I spoke privately to people, but I didn't want to go public until I felt I would be ready, and that was many years later.
Okay, let me ask you this. Now, we've been talking about your book, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. We're talking to Anneke Lewis. Now, Anneke Lewis, is there anything, because we even skipped the mid-break. We didn't do any mid-commercial. I think your story is so important, and I want you to get everything out that you want to get out. Is there anything you want the audience to know that I haven't asked you about this story?
What I want from an audience is... when people hear about my story, often people feel quite helpless, and they say, but what can I do? I need to do something. I can't take this in because there's nothing I can do about it. And I think that to absorb this reality, that is really the most important thing that you can do. And to be able to fully absorb it, it really is important to have a connection to spirit in some way, a real connection to spirit, not a belief. And so it's not something that can be imposed, obviously. But I do think that it is necessary to really hold these truths. Because without the light, let's say, this is so dark that without any light, you can't fathom it. You can't accept it. And ultimately, the only work you can always ever do is to go inside yourself and to look at yourself and to see how you are participating in a society where this is the best, the best protected secret.
Mm-hmm.
You are participating in this. You are part of this society. We are giving our power away to these psychopaths. All of us, we are doing that. So it's about looking at ourselves so that we don't do it. We don't play the game.
It's so
we don't
true.
play their games. We don't play by their rules.
Right, because we are all willing participants in this. The 90% of my audience here in this show is not going to be surprised by anything you say. I don't want to say 90%, but a good enough percentage is not going to be surprised by a word you say, And we are, in fact, willing participants in allowing this to go on. And it's huge. We have to make some huge adjustments in the way we want to live our lives, because we are all going to be judged for this one day. Anneke Lewis, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I know how hard it is to come on and talk about this, even though you've talked about it 1,000 times. I understand, and I appreciate it, and it is important. The book is called Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. You can find Anneke, and it's Anneke Lucas, Lucas.com. You could find her on Instagram, too, at Anneke Lucas, Anneke.Lucas. Keep an eye out for this trauma yoga retreat in upstate Minnewaska, July 18th to the 22nd. You can find the details for that on AnnekeLucas.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.